we are racing towards the closest point to Europe's biggest nuclear reactor. And right now, something's going deeply wrong at the plant, sitting right on the front line of this war.
Europe's largest nuclear plant is on edge tonight. It remains under Russian control.
To film it, you gotta sprint through open ground before a Russian drone sees you from the sky. While filming this report, we hear that Russian drones are now being launched from inside the power station. That means the risk here is rising dramatically. The risk of radiation leak, the risk of catastrophe. And this reactor is twice the size of Chernobyl. And if something goes wrong here, the disaster won't stop in Ukraine. Six nuclear reactors on the edge of the Dnipro River. Enough electricity to power a country the size of Portugal. For decades, this was supposed to represent the future. Engineering, progress, humanity, harnessing the atom itself. Then the invasion begins. Russian columns race towards the plant. Gunfire erupts beside the reactors, tracer fire cuts through the night sky. Workers inside the station broadcast desperate warnings across loudspeakers. But the Russians kept coming. And for the first time in human history, a functioning nuclear power plant is seized during a full-scale war. Russian troops storm the facility, scientists detained, interrogated and tortured. The station cut off from the outside world. Then the reactors are shut down, dormant. But dormant doesn't mean safe, because even a silent reactor has to breathe. Cooling systems must keep running, water must keep flowing, electricity must stay online. Because if the cooling stops, temperatures rise, pressure builds, and the radiation escapes. Then, another catastrophe. The Kakhovka dam is destroyed. The vast reservoir feeding this entire region collapses. Water levels plunge. Cooling systems thrown into danger. And the risk keeps growing. Power lines fail again and again, emergency generators activated repeatedly. Every blackout bringing the plant closer to disaster. And if something finally breaks, the fallout won't stop at the front line. And right now, the front line is this city, right on the edge of the river, where Russian FPV drones strike every single hour. And at the very end of this shoreline is the only vantage point where you can still see what's happening across the water. And that is where we're headed right now.
So right now we're headed towards the city centre, and already the drone detector has started beeping, and that means there are FPVs in the sky. And what I want to do right now is head towards the riverbank, and down there we can get a clean shot of the power station. But that also means if we can see the station, the Russians can see us, the Russians that are occupying that side of the river. So we got to be quick and we got to be fast. I wanted to drive all the way down there, but the police have literally just said that it's much more risky if you're in a vehicle, because the drones can chase you and hit the car, and you're less likely to be spotted if you're on foot. So it's going to be about a 30-minute walk through one of the most dangerous and abandoned neighborhoods in the city, but it's the only way right now to get towards the riverbank. The Russians have denied all of this. They've denied targeting civilians, but more specifically, they've denied doing any of this from the power plant. They've denied launching drones, and they've denied doing anything from that station. And I want to see if that's true. And the only way to do that is to head right down there towards the river.
So we have been walking for about 15 minutes, hiding every single time the drone detector goes off.
Nice.
Нема. Зараз давайте трошки почекаємо.
We literally have to run like this just to get a quick shot of Europe's biggest nuclear reactor. Honestly, of 3.5 years in Ukraine, covering every single frontline area, this has to be the most surreal. And the closer we get to the river, the quieter it gets. There's literally no one here. There's satellite images that have just been released in the New York Times showing that the Russians right now, as of 2026, are desperately trying to reopen this reactor. 6 reactors online are far more dangerous than 6 reactors in a cooling phase. And the Russians have already made this power station incredibly dangerous and volatile by blowing the Kakhovka dam a few kilometers this way. That meant that the water level dropped significantly all across this region, and that reservoir was designed to cool the reactors, all 6 of them. So then they had to install pumps, and those pumps require electricity. Most of the power lines that provide that electricity, that keep the reactors cool, have been damaged or destroyed. And it's gotten so bad that 15 times the entire station has lost all power and had to rely on diesel generators. That is the last resort ever. You literally never want a nuclear power station running on diesel generators. And the last time it happened was a week ago today, 26th of April, 2026, which happened to be the 40th anniversary of Chernobyl. And all this on top of the fact that all the scientists and engineers keeping that plant going for the last few decades are basically gone. They were tortured, chased out. And so now you got a situation where you've got Europe's biggest nuclear power station without any staff, running on diesel backup generators, without a cooling system, and they're trying to get it online. This could be a catastrophe. And none of this is hypothetical. This will happen if these mistakes keep getting made. Okay, so there it is. One of the most terrifying parts about this is the fact that I can see that plant means the Russians can very likely see where I'm standing right now. And that's what the police have told me as well. Come here at your own risk. But here it is. And listen to this announcement. It's saying there's FPVs in the air, right in front of the largest nuclear power plant.
Nikopol, microrayon trubnych par. Nikopol, microrayon trubnych par.
Across the river is Enerhodar. The name means the gift of energy. More than 50,000 people lived here. A city built around power, around work, around the idea that the atom could light homes, heat schools, and give an entire region a future. This one plant produced 20% of all Ukraine's electricity. Enough power for a country the size of Portugal. Enerhodar was a nuclear town. Generations grew up in the shadow of these cooling towers. Then the Russians came, and ordinary people did something extraordinary. They went out onto the road and they built barricades. They stood with tires, trucks, anything they could find to stop an army from reaching the nuclear plant. Not to protect themselves, to protect the world.
Місто сьогодні, завтра і післязавтра буде постійно патрулювати з силами самооборони.
After gunfire, shelling, and a fire at the plant, by the morning of March 4th, Europe's largest nuclear power station had been seized. Now, most of that city is empty. And from here, Nikopol looks back at a city that was built to give light, now trapped in the dark.
Is it likely that someone could have seen us just in the short time that we were there from the Russian side?
Yes.
Да. Ну, нас просто можуть або з артилерії, або з дрона вбити, як і мінімум. Останній раз я так в Покровській громаді, теж журналістами, ми на берег виходили, і нас з міномета просто обстрілювали. Ми єлі встигли втекти. Перед нами просто падали, прямо по нам. Тобто, ну, берег – це не те місце, де треба знімати. Безпека все одно жити хочеться, правильно, кожному. Життя – це важливо.
Мені больно дивитись на те, що перетворюється Нікополь. І сусідні села, вся оця берегова лінія, на жаль, страждає дуже. Ось така у них тактика. Просто, скажімо так, тероризувати мирне населення, тому що фізично вони сюди зайти не можуть, тобто так, да, як там на Донеччині і так далі. Інша трошки ситуація, тому вони знищують місто так, як вони можуть.
To see how dangerous Nikopol's become, we joined the White Angels, a police unit evacuating civilians from the city's most exposed streets.
So this is reinforced metal.
Спрашивают, если дрон прилетит по этой машине, мы выживем?
Нет, честно?
Да.
Советское качество. Ну, главное, что двери открылись, потому что порвет. Сейчас по Шевченко надо будет заезжать и быстро подниматься наверх. И у нас там будет минут 5 буквально.
Calls for evacuation now mostly come from the south of Nikopol, close to the riverbank where the Russian FPVs can reach. The White Angels move civilians north out of the worst of the drop zone. Just like Kherson, Nikopol is being pushed back from its own waterfront. Now they're taking us to where those evacuations happen.
So this is where all the civilians are getting evacuated from. It's right on the river, and as you can see, all the guys who've taken me here, they're just staring right up at the sky right now, looking for drones. The beepers are going off every 2 seconds. So this is basically what civilians have to live with. You can see some residents there are kind of hiding under cover. Everyone's looking up at the sky. We won't hang around here for very long.
Все дуже просто. Ми просто для них полігон. Тут є на чому тренуватися. Ми дійсно знаємо, що з тієї сторони є учбові центри, де вони навчають своїх солдатів, і вони тренуються на мирному населенні.
What is the biggest concern with the plant?
Перетворити на військову базу та запустити для потреб своїх. За допомогою ядерного об'єкту можна диктувати свої умови практично всьому світу. Якщо вони будуть програвати цю війну, я думаю, що ми ті умови почуємо. Тобто це атомний об'єкт шантажу, можна так сказати.
After leaving the White Angels, I wanted to understand how a city like this keeps functioning at all. So I spoke to the mayor of Nikopol.
How is it being the mayor of a city under fire every single day like this?
А іншого в нас немає і вибору. Ну, я керівник міста, да, і сьогодні така ситуація, ми повинні працювати і робити все, що від нас залежить для того, щоб місто... Дивіться, ну ми в місті нічого не плануємо, ми тільки робимо те, щоб є сьогодні, є проблема, ми її вирішуємо. Надалі ми плани поки ніякі не будуємо.
People often ask why civilians don't always leave, and the answer is usually simple.
Война пришла, я люблю свой город, я здесь родилась, но пришла война. До последнего мы не зламні, ми тримаємося.
Дякую вам.
Я вам скажу, що в своєму городі, ти в своєму городі.
Дома – це дома.
Дома, да. Thank you.
So right now I'm at a hotel in Zaporizhia, about an hour from Nikopol, and I'm looking back at all the footage that we filmed today in Nikopol, and I had no idea about this until about 2 minutes ago. The police officer that I was speaking to, and this wasn't being translated at the time, is saying that the Russians are firing drones, the drones that were hitting the city, the civilians we spoke to, from the nuclear power station.
Ну, взагалі вони використовують просто атомну станцію для того, аби прикривати свою, ну, скажімо, свої воєнні злочини. Вони звідти там координують, працюють. Там раніше був, як запускали дрони.
The very idea that the Russians aren't only occupying Europe's largest nuclear facility, but using it as a firing point, as a military position, this is completely unprecedented if it's true. And look, it needs further verification. I've just reached out to local reconnaissance groups, people whose job it is to know where everything is in the sky, launch points. So there's something called the IAEA. This is the international body for protecting the world from the worst case scenario. And they've released a report this week, and they haven't mentioned anything about this. In fact, I've looked back at their previous reports, and they said that they could not confirm attacks from or against the plant, partly because of Russian restrictions limiting access to certain areas. So they haven't been able to find any evidence. If I can find that evidence this weekend, I'll be submitting it immediately to this agency to get a response to see how they're going to deal with this, because this would be unprecedented in terms of escalations. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to see what these units say and see if we get anywhere with this information. So we've just got a phone call from an officer of the 310 Brigade. This brigade specializes in reconnaissance. They know exactly what's taking off and landing in the Nikopol direction. And that means they know exactly what's taking off and landing in the Zaporizhia nuclear power station. So we're headed to see him now. Do you have any intelligence that suggests that this is a new tactic from the Russians, that they've started to do this?
Це факт, і не тільки знаходяться їх точки виліту на атомних в межах, будемо так казати, атомної електростанції, а також на будь-яких цивільних об'єктах. Будемо чесними, є правила ведення війни. Ми, як цивілізована країна, ми намагаємося зробити все і дотримуємося цих правил. Точки виліту ворожих FPV-дронів противника на атомних станціях, точки виліту в цивільних будівлях. Вони все роблять так, щоб ми вбивали цивільних. Але ми цього не робимо. They try to make this nuclear station as a shield from us.
So that was absolutely fascinating. And this confirms our worst fears that the Russians, it looks like, are firing drones either from the station or over the station. And this represents an incredibly serious escalation. The International Atomic Energy Agency has categorically said that they have no reason to suggest that the Russians have or are doing this right now. But what they have said is if the Russians start doing this, it would represent a serious escalation, not just here in Ukraine, but across the planet. But this is honestly not what I expected when I first arrived in Nikopol. I've never been to that city before, and I expected to find civilians under attack, but I certainly didn't expect to find this kind of escalation. The rest of the world need to know that Russians are not just terrorizing civilians here on a daily basis, but they're willing to do it to the entire planet, and that is what will happen. Okay, so we just got back from Nikopol, and I've got my laptop out because in the last 30 minutes we've been sent some footage, and it looks like intercepted Russian drone footage flying directly over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We're going to blow it up here on the laptop and take a look. You can see clearly the actual reactors, and if I put it side by side with the other footage, it looks very, very, very obvious that an actual Russian drone are currently flying over the nuclear facility, and that is incredibly dangerous. And this is absolutely unbelievable. The very idea that the Russians are flying drones not just from the station but over the nuclear reactor, and that changes this entire picture. Because nuclear power plants are built with layers of physical safety, containment, redundancy, and fail-safes. So they are absolutely not built to exist in an active battlefield. In about 30 minutes, I'm going to be meeting with the mayor of Enerhodar. This is the city directly opposite the river of Nikopol. He's been operating remotely, but what's very, very important here is that he's been in constant contact with those in the plant and with what is happening in that facility. And I wanted to speak to the mayor to show him these findings, to get his reaction, and honestly, just see if he's surprised. We've been speaking to people in Nikopol yesterday and a different unit, but it sounds like the Russians are now using the actual nuclear facility within the grounds to launch FPVs as a launch pad. How do you react to hearing that?
Так, вони з першого дня, коли захопили атомну станцію, вони там розмістили військовий контингент, розмістили на постійній основі до 1000 військових озброєних з вибухівкою, з технікою, і все це відбувається за периметром атомної станції, в периметрі атомної станції. Тобто вони, прикриваючись ядерним об'єктом, таким чином шантажують весь світ цивілізований.
What could that lead to? What's the worst case scenario?
Якщо брати по приблизним підрахункам, то там по ядерних матеріалах тільки в 10 разів більше, ніж знаходилось в Чорнобилі. Тому в цьому плані наслідки можуть бути дуже катастрофічні. Таке анемне захоплення найбільшої станції Європи, воно відбувається в 21 сторіччі. Це сумно, насправді.
So I've just got back from speaking to the mayor, and what stands out isn't speculation. It's the very idea that this plant is no longer just a piece of infrastructure, it's now an active part of the battlefield. So the next step here is obvious. I want a technical perspective. Someone who understands not just warfare, but what happens when warfare intersects with something like this. In a few minutes, I'll be speaking to Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. He's a former British Army officer, but he's one of the leading experts on chemical and nuclear risk environments. How significant is this, and what's your reaction to this footage?
Well, I think it's my reaction is one of complete shock. The potential for accident is absolutely massive. That should be considered a war crime. If there is military munitions in the area, an accident could create something far worse than just a drone blowing up. Of course, in a way, it does show how desperate the Russians are getting. We know that across the Donbass and other areas they are moving backwards. This is of huge concern because a lot of modelling has been done. If there was a nuclear accident in Zaporizhzhia, the thought is that most of the contamination would head westwards and therefore affect Ukraine and Europe. This is incredibly dangerous, and hopefully the International Atomic Energy Agency will get aboard this very, very quickly. The worst case scenario would be some sort of chain reaction within the reactors, which would cause them to overheat and explode. Nuclear fuel, if it gets to a critical situation, like it did in Chernobyl, can explode. I am a massive fan of the nuclear deterrence. I think the idea of mutually assured destruction has protected the planet since the end of the Second World War, and we haven't seen major conflict. However, Ukraine war is sort of changing that. Putin seems to be pretty happy with mutually assured destruction. This is recklessness beyond really comprehension.
Hamish, thank you so much for speaking to me. And just to step back with all of this for a second, the reason that I'm so focused on what's happening at this plant, because the same people that caused the Chernobyl disaster to happen, the same system of secrecy, the same system of bullshit that mean that we don't even know how many people died, are the same people that are operating the plant today. And if you don't believe me, the HBO series that everyone knows and loves about this disaster, about Chernobyl, was banned in Russia in 2019 when it came out, because Russia hasn't changed a bit since the collapse of the Soviet Union. In fact, it's gotten worse. And one of the main problems with all of this is that when the Berlin Wall fell and when the Soviet system collapsed, the liberal West thought that that system died with it. And in fact, it got worse. And now these people are running this nuclear facility. The same people that are running this plant, by the way, are the exact same system that flew drones into the protective shield that was built by the international community around Chernobyl just last year. The same people that are running this nuclear facility, which is the largest in Europe. And this is why all of this represents a complete disaster. And the reason that I'm focusing so much on this plant today is because the fact they're now being so brazen as to fly drones over it should wake up everyone that this isn't just a battle between the Russians at the other side of the river and the Ukrainians in Nikopol. It's Russians versus the entire planet. And just before I finish this, I want to speak to someone that understands nuclear energy very, very, very specifically. Mariana Buzernin is one of the world's leading experts on nuclear weapons. She's one of the people that has studied exactly what happens when nuclear systems fall into unstable hands.
40 years after Chernobyl, we are still observing the consequences of that disaster. The causes of it go way back to the design of a faulty reactor, to the kind of system that allowed that design to be built. Chernobyl basically exposed the rot and dysfunction of the Soviet system.
The Soviet authorities tried to cover up the accident. Though they knew that radiation levels were rising, putting the population in danger, they refused to give the alarm. Radioactivity from Chernobyl, 100 kilometers to the north, was now blowing towards the city. Yet here too, no warnings were given.
There's sort of this maxim that took hold internationally, that a nuclear accident anywhere is a nuclear accident everywhere, simply because radiation respects no borders. And the fallout went as far as actually Britain and Ireland even. The storming with live military attack on the operating nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhia was really quite unprecedented in human history. And so the parallels are such that the kind of system that is rooted in Moscow has manufactured and manipulated nuclear risks in the civilian nuclear sector, where these were supposed to be atoms for peace. They're being manipulated as tools of war. Essentially, when you have a nuclear chain reaction going on in the core of an operating reactor, this is a very dangerous situation, right? There's a lot of energy released. The reactor relies on sort of robust cooling systems. If the power is cut off to that cooling system, then the heat cannot be whisked away. The water boils, the fuel melts, and then you have a nuclear accident. Yeah, there is something about nuclear, whether it's atoms for peace or atoms for war. They have power over us humans, those who are in control of them, as well as those who are on the receiving end. These risks are easy to create, easy to manipulate, and the fear that it instills is real. And so those in power, especially if it's the kind of regime that does not observe any international rules and norms, that does not practice restraint, these type of risks are very seductive to those kinds of regimes.
So Nikopol is behind me, and a few hundred kilometers this way is Chernobyl. 40 years ago, the world stopped. Not because of what it could see, but because of what it finally understood. That something as small as an atom could unmake everything. But we already knew that. We knew it the very moment the light vanished over Hiroshima. It erased a city and left shadows where people had been. That was the line that humanity drew and promised to never cross again. The Cold War didn't give us peace. It gave us fear. Fear that if we ever stepped back from the edge, there might be nothing left. And for a time, that fear held. Eisenhower stood before the world and said the atom could be something else.
Peaceful power from atomic energy is here, now, today. This greatest of destructive forces can be developed into a great boon for the benefit of all mankind.
Not a weapon, but a force for life. For energy, for progress, atoms for peace. And for a moment, we believed him. We built reactors instead of bombs. We built power stations instead of fallout shelters. And we told ourselves that the danger had been mastered. And now, standing here in Nikopol, we feel something else. And that's not that fear protects us. Not anymore, it's that fear is now being used. People here don't study history. They live it. They run from drones, they count the seconds, and they listen to the sky. And now, the same atom that we tried to civilize is back inside a war. Not as a weapon we launch, but as a risk that we gamble with. And this is the moment that history warns us about. Not the explosion, but the moment before it. Because catastrophe doesn't begin with a blast. It begins with a decision. A line crossed. Then another and another. Until the unthinkable becomes routine. We told ourselves, after Hiroshima, after Chernobyl, that we had learned that the atom would never again be part of a conflict. But standing here right now, that promise feels fragile because this doesn't need to explode to change everything. It only needs to be pushed far enough that one day it does. And if that day comes, there'll be no speeches left to give, no lessons left to learn. Because when it comes to this, we don't get a rewrite, only an ending.